Welcome to the world of science fiction stories, and don't forget to like, share and subscribe my channel. Enjoy the listening. The alien nurse who couldn't believe how quickly a human recovered. The alien medical bay on Turks was a marvel of technology. Smooth metallic surfaces reflected the soft blue light that permeated the room, giving it an ethereal, almost otherworldly quality. The air was crisp and sterile as automated drones buzzed around, ensuring that every aspect of the facility was immaculate and efficient. LRA, an experienced alien nurse, was known for her ability to stay calm even in the most critical situations. Her kind, the Texi, were a species of slender beings with an almost translucent appearance, their skin shimmering with hues of silver and blue. They moved with a calm grace, and their entire civilization was built around efficiency, peace, and the advancement of medical science. LRA had seen her share of injuries, fractured limbs, organ failures, and everything in between, but nothing could have prepared her for what was about to unfold on that calm afternoon. She was in the midst of her routine rounds, checking on the recovery status of her fellow Texi patients, when the doors to the emergency bay burst open. Two alien medics rushed in, their faces displaying an urgency that was rare among her kind. On the hover gurney between them lay a heavily injured human. "Prepare an isolation bay immediately," one of the medics barked, the tone of his voice laden with concern. LRA's brows furrowed. Humans were still relatively new to the Texi, and while they had heard stories of Earth's inhabitants, they hadn't interacted much beyond the joint missions established in recent years. Humans were perceived as both fascinating and fragile, a young species that displayed a peculiar balance of curiosity and recklessness. The human on the gurney was in critical condition, his breathing shallow and his body covered in deep cuts and bruises. Blood, red and vividly contrasting against the sterile blue hues of the medical bay, soaked through the makeshift bandages wrapped around his torso. His left leg was twisted at an unnatural angle, clearly broken in multiple places. LRA quickly sprang into action, guiding the gurney to an isolation bay where the patient could be stabilized. "Who is he?" LRA asked one of the medics while adjusting the medical scanners. "Captain John Harrison. He was injured during the joint training exercises in Sector 7, the medic replied. Sector 7. LRA knew it well. It was a rugged area used for endurance training, filled with steep cliffs and unpredictable terrain. The Texi used it as a testing ground for their resilience and adaptability, and she couldn't fathom why the humans had been allowed there. Their physiology seemed too delicate for such a hostile environment. LRA began her assessment, the medical scanners whirring as they projected a holographic image of John's injuries into the air above his body. She traced her long, slender fingers over the hologram, her eyes narrowing as she analyzed the damage. The results were worse than she had imagined: a shattered femur, 3 broken ribs, a punctured lung, multiple contusions, and severe internal bleeding. For a Texi, injuries like these would mean months of intensive care, and even then, survival would be uncertain. "Stabilize his vitals," LRA instructed a nearby medical drone. The drone emitted a soft hum as it administered a series of injections, each filled with a cocktail of painkillers, coagulants, and tissue-regenerating agents. LRA watched the holographic display as John's heart rate slowly steadied, though his condition remained critical. The medics who had brought John in stayed for a moment, their expressions tense. One of them finally broke the silence. "Do you think he'll make it?" he asked, his voice betraying a hint of doubt. LRA hesitated. "I don't know. Human physiology is different from ours. We will do everything we can, but these injuries are severe." The medics nodded solemnly and left the room, leaving LRA alone with her patient. She studied him for a moment, curiosity piqued. Humans, she had heard, were known for their tenacity, but looking at John now, frail and broken, she couldn't help but wonder how much of that was true. His face, though covered in grime and blood, had a certain determination to it, even in unconsciousness. She found herself intrigued by the species that had come so far from their distant blue planet to join the intergalactic community. LRA adjusted the medical bed so that John lay more comfortably. She moved swiftly but carefully, her hand gliding over the various controls that adjusted the artificial gravity field around his injuries to reduce pressure. She injected nanobots into his bloodstream, designed to repair tissue at a microscopic level, and initiated a series of scans to monitor his progress. It was all she could do for now. Hours passed, and LRA remained by John's side, her eyes fixed on the monitors. His condition was stable, but barely. The nanobots worked tirelessly, knitting together the torn muscle fibers and fractured bone, but LRA knew the real challenge was yet to come. Humans, unlike the Texi, had unpredictable healing patterns. Their bodies were resilient in some ways but fragile in others. The scans showed his immune system working overtime, battling both the physical trauma and the foreign nanobots that were attempting to assist in his recovery. LRA leaned back in her chair, her mind drifting to the stories she had heard about humans. They were said to be adaptable, resourceful, and stubborn, traits that had served them well on their volatile home planet. Earth, with its unpredictable weather, natural disasters, and diverse ecosystems, had forged a species capable of enduring incredible hardship. LRA wondered if that same resilience would help John now. Suddenly, a soft groan broke through the steady hum of the medical bay. LRA's eyes snapped to John, her heart skipping a beat. His eyelids fluttered, and his fingers twitched slightly. He was waking up. It was far too soon for a Texi to regain consciousness after such trauma, and yet here he was, fighting to wake up. LRA moved closer, her voice calm but firm. "Captain John, can you hear me?" she asked, her Texi accent giving her words a melodic quality. John's eyes slowly opened, unfocused and glassy. He blinked several times, his gaze eventually settling on LRA. He looked disoriented, his brow furrowed in confusion. Where am I?" he croaked, his voice barely a whisper. "You are in the medical bay on Turks," LRA replied, her eyes studying his face for any sign of distress. "You were injured during the training exercise. You need to stay still and let the medical equipment do its work." John winced as he tried to shift his position, a grimace of pain crossing his face. "Feels like I got hit by a freight train," he muttered, his attempt at humor surprising LRA. She couldn't help but raise an eyebrow. "You should not be awake," she said, her tone a mixture of surprise and disapproval. "Your injuries are extensive. You need rest." John let out a breath that was almost a laugh, though it quickly turned into a cough that racked his body with pain. "Rest later. Need to get back to my team," he said, his voice strained but resolute. LRA shook her head, baffled. She had seen many patients in her career, but never one so determined to move despite the severity of his condition. It was as if he refused to acknowledge the reality of his injuries. She placed a gentle hand on his shoulder, her touch cool against his feverish skin. "Your team is being taken care of right now. You need to focus on healing." John's eyes met hers, and for a moment, LRA saw something in them that she couldn't quite place, a fire, a determination that defied logic. It was then that she began to understand what made humans different. They were not just resilient, they were relentless. They refused to give up, even when their bodies were broken and their chances were slim. LRA spent the rest of the day monitoring John's progress, her curiosity growing with each passing hour. The nanobots were working more effectively than she had anticipated, aided by John's own immune system, which seemed to adapt quickly to their presence. His vital signs, though still weak, were improving. She watched as his body began to heal at a rate that defied her expectations. The fractured bones were slowly knitting back together, and the torn muscles were regenerating. By the end of the first day, John was not only stable but showing signs of significant recovery. LRA couldn't believe what she was seeing. She had treated Texi soldiers with far less severe injuries who had taken weeks just to regain consciousness, and yet here was this human, already on the mend after just a few hours. As the artificial lights of the medical bay dimmed to simulate night, LRA found herself sitting by John's bedside, her mind racing with questions. What drove him to recover so quickly? Was it purely biological, or was there something else at play, something deeper, something uniquely human? She watched as John drifted in and out of sleep, his face occasionally twitching with pain but never showing any sign of defeat. LRA knew that she was witnessing something extraordinary, something that challenged her understanding of medicine and resilience. She made a note to report her observations to the medical council, but deep down, she knew that no report could truly capture what she was seeing. This was not just a matter of biology, it was a testament to the indomitable spirit of a species that refused to be broken. And as she sat there, watching over her patient, LRA couldn't help but feel a sense of admiration for this fragile, resilient being. For the first time, she understood why the humans had been welcomed into the intergalactic community. They were not the most advanced, nor the strongest, but they possessed something far more valuable, the courage to keep fighting, no matter the odds. The medical bay was quiet, the soft hum of the machines the only sound as LRA closed her eyes for a moment, her mind filled with thoughts of the strange and wonderful species called humans. The artificial dawn in the medical bay came as soft, ambient lighting slowly increased in intensity, giving the room a serene and hopeful glow. LRA, having spent the night by John's side, stirred awake. She had nodded off for only a short while, her mind still racing with thoughts of the resilient human patient under her care. John remained asleep, his breathing steady, though occasionally interrupted by pained murmurs. She observed his face, noting the lines of determination etched across it, even in sleep. She couldn't help but wonder what fueled his strength, this unyielding spirit that refused to surrender. LRA ran a quick scan, assessing his internal systems, and marveled at the progress. The nanobots had worked tirelessly throughout the night, repairing tissue and aiding cellular regeneration. But what truly amazed her was the incredible adaptability of John's immune system. Unlike her own kind, the Texi, who had fragile physiologies, humans seemed to thrive in adversity. The data streaming on the holographic display was proof enough, his damaged lung was functioning again, his blood pressure had stabilized, and the previously broken bones were beginning to fuse. She noted her observations carefully into her data pad. The medical council would be interested in the findings, but no scientific report could do justice to what she witnessed in person. Just then, a groan came from John's direction, and LRA watched as he shifted slightly, blinking his eyes open. She saw his gaze sweep across the room before focusing on her, the corners of his lips lifting slightly in what she understood to be a smile, though the pain was evident in his eyes. "Good morning, Captain John," LRA said, her melodic voice calm and soothing. She approached him, adjusting the medical bed so he could recline more comfortably. "How are you feeling today?" John exhaled, a raspy chuckle escaping him. "I've had better mornings," he said, his voice still hoarse but somehow carrying a hint of humor. He looked at her, his eyes scanning the unfamiliar surroundings. "I'm guessing I'm still alive, so that's a plus." LRA nodded. She wasn't accustomed to this sort of response from a patient. The Texi often took their recovery in silence, understanding the severity of their condition and submitting themselves entirely to the care of the medical staff. But this human, despite his battered state, was joking, smiling even. It was as though he didn't fully grasp the gravity of his situation, or perhaps, as LRA was beginning to suspect, he chose not to acknowledge it at all. "You're still alive," she confirmed. "In fact, you're recovering at an extraordinary rate. Your body seems to be adapting well to the nanobots and responding positively to treatment." John let out a slow, pained breath as he shifted to sit up, much to LRA's protest. She quickly placed her hand on his shoulder, attempting to guide him back down. "You need to rest," she insisted. "Your injuries." Yeah, I know. Bad shape, barely alive, lots of broken stuff," he cut her off, his words punctuated by a wince as he continued to move. He managed to prop himself up on his elbows, his face pale but determined. But I can't just lay here. My team, they need me. LRA's eyes widened. Your team is safe, she assured him. They have been taken care of. Right now, your priority is to focus on your recovery. John looked at her, his gaze intense. There was something about his eyes, an unwavering fire that LRA found herself both bewildered and fascinated by. They might be safe now, but the mission's not over, he said. I can't sit this out. They need me out there. LRA was taken aback. She couldn't understand it. Her kind had always valued the collective good over individual action. Texi soldiers followed orders, trusted their superiors, and knew when to step back. They understood the necessity of rest, of letting others take over when they could not continue. But this human, he seemed unable to accept that his role could be filled by someone else, even if it meant risking his own life. I must insist, LRA said, her voice firm but gentle. If you push yourself too soon, you could undo all the progress you've made. Your body is not ready for strenuous activity. John smiled again, a tired, almost mischievous smile. You know, I get that a lot, he said. Doctors back on Earth said the same thing when I got my ribs cracked during a training exercise. They told me to take it easy, and I was back on my feet in a week. LRA was stunned. You sustained rib fractures during training, and you returned in a week. The concept was almost unfathomable to her. A Texi with broken ribs would require weeks, if not months, to recover, yet here was John, casually talking about such an ordeal as though it was nothing more than a slight inconvenience. Yeah, John said, his gaze softening as he looked at LRA. It's just part of who we are, you know. We push through. We can't afford not to. He paused for a moment, his eyes drifting as though recalling a distant memory. Back home, there are people waiting for me, my family, my friends. I can't let them down. And out here, my team is my family. I don't give up on family. LRA was quiet, his words resonating with her in a way she hadn't anticipated. It wasn't just biology, it wasn't just an instinctual drive to survive. It was a choice, a conscious decision to fight, no matter how impossible the odds seemed. She could see it now, the reason why humans had thrived despite being a relatively young species. They were bound by something deeper, something intangible, a willpower that refused to bend, even in the face of overwhelming adversity. She watched as John struggled to sit up further, his face contorting with pain but his determination unbroken. LRA sighed softly, realizing that arguing with him was futile. Instead, she adjusted the medical bed to support his back, allowing him to sit up without straining himself. If you must insist on this, then at least let me help you, she said. John looked at her, gratitude evident in his eyes. Thanks, Nurse LRA, he said, his voice softer now. He shifted slightly, wincing as his broken ribs protested the movement. I guess I owe you one. LRA smiled, a small, genuine smile. You owe me nothing, Captain. My duty is to ensure your well-being. But if you truly wish to repay me, then perhaps you could follow my instructions and take it easy. John chuckled, though the action sent a shiver of pain through his body. I'll do my best, he said. No promises, though. As the day went on, LRA found herself staying by John's side, intrigued by his resilience and his stories of Earth. He spoke of the mountains where he grew up, of the harsh winters and the warm summers. He spoke of his family, of his mother who made the best apple pie, of his younger sister who was training to be a paramedic. He spoke of his friends, of the laughter they shared, of the promises they made to look out for each other. LRA listened, her curiosity growing with every word. She had always known humans were different, but now she was beginning to understand how their strength came not just from their physical abilities but from their connections, their bonds with one another. John wasn't recovering just for himself, he was recovering for the people he loved, for the promises he had made. It was this unbreakable willpower, this refusal to give up, that was driving his body to heal at a rate that defied logic. By the end of the day, John was able to stand, albeit with the help of LRA and a set of crutches. He was unsteady, his legs weak, but he refused to remain bedridden. LRA walked beside him, her hands hovering near him, ready to catch him if he stumbled. She watched as he took each step with deliberate care, his face a mask of concentration. Every movement was a struggle, every breath labored, but he pushed forward, refusing to let his injuries hold him back. "You are a very stubborn individual, Captain John," LRA said, her tone a mix of exasperation and admiration. John glanced at her, a grin spreading across his face. "Yeah, well, stubbornness runs in the family," he said. "My mom always said I had a thick skull." LRA shook her head, unable to suppress a smile. She had never met anyone like him, someone who could find humor even in the most dire circumstances, someone who refused to give in to despair. It was both baffling and inspiring. As they made their way back to the bed, LRA helped John settle down, adjusting the pillows to support him. She ran another scan, checking his vitals, and was pleased to see that his condition had improved even more. His heart rate was steady, his blood pressure stable, and the fractured bones were continuing to heal. "You're making remarkable progress," LRA said, her voice filled with genuine admiration. "Your body is healing at an extraordinary rate." John looked at her, his expression softening. "Thanks to you," he said. "I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for you and your team." LRA shook her head. "Your recovery is your own doing, Captain. We may have provided the treatment, but it is your willpower that is driving your body to heal." John was silent for a moment, his eyes meeting hers. There was a depth to his gaze, a quiet strength that spoke of everything he had endured and everything he was willing to endure for the people he cared about. "You know, Nurse LRA," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "I think we're a lot stronger than we look." LRA nodded, her heart swelling with a sense of admiration she had never felt before. "Yes, Captain John, I believe you are." As night fell once again, LRA found herself sitting by John's bedside, her mind filled with thoughts of the strange and wonderful species called humans. She had learned so much in just a few short days about resilience, about determination, about the power of human spirit. She had always believed that strength came from the body, from the physical ability to withstand pain and endure hardship, but now she knew that true strength came from within, from the heart, from the connections that bound people together. She watched as John drifted off to sleep, his breathing steady, his face relaxed. He had a long road ahead of him, but LRA had no doubt that he would make it. He was a fighter, and he had something worth fighting for. And as she sat there, watching over her patient, LRA couldn't help but feel a sense of hope. Perhaps there was something they could learn from the humans, something about resilience, about courage, about the unbreakable willpower that refused to be defeated. Perhaps, in the end, it wasn't just the humans who needed the Texi, but the Texi who needed the humans. For the first time, LRA understood why the humans had been welcomed into the intergalactic community. They were not the most advanced, nor the strongest, but they possessed something far more valuable, the courage to keep fighting, no matter the odds. And that, LRA realized, was a strength that could change the galaxy.